Ontario used to have a program called Slots at Racetracks. It was a vital source of income to the horse tracks and breeders' business. But it cost taxpayers $345 million a year. And so when the McGuinty government canceled the program, saying it was too expensive in an era of austerity, the industry was apoplectic, claiming it couldn't survive without that money. Queen's Park appointed 3 former Ontario cabinet ministers, one from each of the major parties, to look at this, and those 3 appointees join us now. They are Elmer Buchanan, former NDP cabinet minister and member for Hastings-Peterborough; John Snoblin, former Progressive Conservative cabinet minister and member for Mississauga West; and John Wilkinson, former Liberal cabinet minister and member for Perth-Wellington. And it's good to have you 3 former politicians back at our table here at TVO.
Great to be with you.
Nice to have you here.
It's so much more relaxing this time.
It does feel that way, doesn't it? I want to start by reading something that comes from your report, and then we'll discuss from there. So if we can, control room. The panel has scanned the global equine sector and cannot find a single example of a viable racehorse industry that does not depend on some form of public support. Where that support has been withdrawn, the industry inevitably collapses. Okay, let's start there. I'm going to start with the horse guy. You're in the Rodeo Hall of Fame, aren't you? So
yeah, everybody gets somewhere.
So I'm going to start with the guy who owns the horses. Why does this, what we apparently think of as a big, rich private business, need taxpayer support?
You know, first there's a lot of competition now, both from the entertainment point of view and also from the gaming point of view. So there's more competition than ever for those gaming dollars. The racehorse industry, going back to the beginning. You know, the Queen's Plate's, 157, I think, years old this year, something in that order. Those 50 guineas came from somewhere that started that race. So there's always been support of the racing industry going back generations and generations and generations, and it's built on that public support.
John Wilkinson, if this industry is not economically viable on its own, should we let nature take its course?
Well, some jurisdictions have actually done that, Steve. But I think what governments come to realize and society comes to realize is the fact that it generates a lot of jobs. And so the question is it in the public good? So what the 3 of us looked at is what is the appropriate relationship between the industry and the government in the public good? And so we wrote an interim report where we agreed what were the kind of the 4 principles that would determine whether or not the industry should have support. The industry was very loud. They said, we're not subsidized. We don't want to be subsidized. And we looked at it, and we looked at it from a provincial point of view. The amount of money going in was more than the amount of money coming back by way of taxes. But we said in our report, now if that was a positive rate of return, then it wouldn't be a subsidy, it'd be an investment. And I think most progressive jurisdictions that support their horse racing industry see it as an investment, but it should never be subsidized.
What do these racetracks all around Ontario mean to the communities in which they are located, Elmer?
Well, most of the tracks, of course, are in rural Ontario, although there's one in Rexdale that people would argue is not really rural. But
that'd be Woodbine, I guess, eh?
That would probably be Woodbine, yes. No, they certainly provide jobs, and in many cases they're low-skill jobs. They're not college or university-educated jobs. So it provides an opportunity for people who don't have that formal education to work with animals, which is something a lot of people enjoy. So yeah, there are a lot of jobs, and there's a lot of economic churn in the horse industry, because the old system with slots and so on provided a lot of good purse money, which allowed people to buy trailers and invest in horses and infrastructure and so on. So it has generated a lot of economic activity and jobs in rural Ontario.
And if the industry disappeared, how many jobs would go with it?
Well, that's a question that is very difficult to answer, because there are more answers than there are people, probably. We heard everything from 60,000 rather, down as low as 5,000. We think the number from all the people that we talked to and listened to is probably more in the 23,000 range. It depends on whether you count people or full-time equivalents or part-time or whatever. But there's significant jobs, probably in the 20,000 range of people involved.
If that many jobs were at risk, John Snoblin, in the auto sector, you can believe that we would be hearing the trumpets blasting about it. Indeed. We haven't heard the trumpets blasting about this in some corners. Obviously, in the industry, in parts of rural Ontario, it's been big news. In Toronto, I'm sorry. In Ottawa, I'm sorry, it hasn't been. Why hasn't this got that much attention?
Well, in part, it's an urban-rural split. I think that although that can be overplayed, the jobs are largely in rural Ontario. But that doesn't mean that urban people don't care about horses. In fact, I think they care a lot about the proper treatment of horses, and that's something maybe we'll touch on. The other part of it is that this industry, you know, people think that the horse industry is unorganized. Well, it's actually anti-organized. I mean, the people, many of whom are my friends, who are involved in the equine industry aren't the kind of people, you know, they're the kind of people who go out into the barn in the morning by themselves. I mean, they are not folks who band together easily. They are not folks who join unions and that sort of thing, so their voice doesn't have that same amplification you would of a highly organized sector like the auto sector.
Because I think there may be people watching this who either don't go to the track or aren't completely familiar with how this works, let's do a little bit of background here. John Wilkinson, the Slots at the Racetracks program, what was that in the first place? What was it designed to do?
Well, what the government, which John was part of, and actually maybe John's better to answer the question because he was around the table, but as we understand it, it was simply put that the government was trying to increase revenue, was looking for a place to have slot parlors, have casinos in town, in urban Ontario. I think there were going to be charity casinos. That ended up being extremely contentious. The horse racing industry was struggling, and there was a great partnership that was arranged that would allow the slots to go into the place where people were already gambling, which was at the track, which was the only, for many, many years in this province, the only legal place that you could actually place a bet until the laws changed in the 70s. And they created what they thought was a win-win deal that the slots would go into the racetracks, and the racetracks, both the owners of the tracks and the horsemen, the people running the horses, would actually split that money. Okay. And it was quite a bit. It wasn't initially a lot of money, but it ended up becoming a lot of money.
$345 million bucks. Okay, since I asked you about a decision his government made, I'm going to ask you about a decision his government made.
They were wrong. No, I'm sorry. That was kind of my
old habits.
My old habit, yeah.
They decided it was too much money and that the racetracks couldn't continue to keep that much, that $345 million bucks, and so decided to bring an end to it. Was that a mistake to do that?
It was a perfect storm. I mean, I hate to use that word, but we had a government that was making a decision based on inputs. And this is a very difficult business to understand. It's the business of hope, not the business of greed. So to use one of John Wilkinson's phrases. So it's a difficult business to understand. Frankly, it's not an industry that's been studied very well or understood very well. And so I think the government assumed that when they withdrew the Slots at Racetracks program, based on the information they had, that the industry would condense but not collapse. We came to a different conclusion very quickly.
What do you think of the decision to end that subsidy?
Well, I think you need to look at the circumstances that surrounded the decision in the first place. And our government went through a similar experience. When you're in really tough times or recession or post-recession, you've got a problem with deficits. You start looking around at how you're spending your money and where you're going to get money in terms of new resources, new revenues. And I think the slots went to racetracks to help a government get some money in order to answer the question about deficits and put more money in the coffers. This particular government, this time around, again, looking for money, looking at a major deficit, looking to see where they could find some money. Look, and there it was in the Slots at Racetrack program that was drawn to their attention by Mr. Drummond when he did his report. So it was for them, it was an easy and a quick way of getting some money. And I don't think if there had been such a big deficit, we may not be sitting here.
Okay, I'm trying to remember now, were you at the cabinet table when this was discussed and eventually decided upon?
No.
You were not there?
No.
So this happened after the 2011 election?
Yeah.
Okay, having said that, did the government make the right call to end this program?
Well, I think the three of us have the common experience of saying that someone's got to make the call. So we were brought in after the call was made to deal with the implications of that. And so when we were asked by our Minister McMeekin, to come together, we were not given the task of saying, can you revisit the decision? So here's the decision, now what do we do with it? And what we came to in the interim report was two things, which was it was not good public policy to continue the Slots at Racetrack program. That in 2012, if someone came along and said, you know what, we're going to take more money than we pay 17 different ministries and we're going to give to the horse racing industry. They're going to give us back jobs and taxes, but it'll be less than what we're giving them. let's put in that program. That would never pass the test in 2012. But on the other hand, we said to the government quite clearly, and they weren't very happy with us, was that the idea that you can take $345 million out all at once and think it's all just going to restructure by itself, that's not on either. So we wrote an interim report to both sides to say, we hear what you're saying. You'd like the program to come back. We don't agree with you because we don't think it's good public policy. But we also said to the government what they didn't want to hear, which was that this is not something that can just be fixed because the forces of economics are going to restructure. You'll end up with a collapse, and you'll get the kind of job losses that we discovered and wanted to make sure that that wasn't going to happen, or at least the government had an alternative, which is what we've been working on ever since.
The direct answer, I think, is in hindsight, SARP was the wrong program. Because it did more than just not return revenue or sufficient revenue to the Crown. It also distorted the horse racing industry. It had it focused on slots instead of focused on their customer, which is a racehorse fan and the horse player. And so part of this exercise is refocusing that industry on what's critical for its future and critical for its growth, which is to create more horse racing fans and more horse players, and that's what they got to get about doing.
But I guess it became very dependent on this increasing pot of money, and the result of which is now trying to retrench or right-size, as the expression today.
Send me a check for $1 billion, I'm going to cash it.
Yeah. Right.
And you can't fault the people who were in the system, set up, and the money. No one would have said, well, this isn't right. They're going to say, this is the way it is. But you also can't fault the government by saying, listen, we got a $14 billion deficit. There's some things that have got to go. And so you just have to reconcile those two.
Yeah, so they were having races just to spend the purse money. And horses were racing more frequently, perhaps, than they should have. The money was there. The horsemen obviously wanted to race for it because it was slots. It wasn't related to how many people were watching or betting. And that's what this, our report tried to do, was address the people who were watching and betting, make it fit the size.
So again, for those who don't follow the racing industry too much, are you saying that the amount of money that people bet and lose most of the time on horse racing, that can't sustain the business?
It can sustain part of it, and we're trying to right size based on what is bet and what people are willing to pay to go and see the races, sponsorship and other forms of revenue, but that should determine how many races you have and what the purses are. We've also in our report said that there needs to be some additional funding, and we've looked at other mechanisms of raising revenues that could go to horse racing rather than direct grants. We've looked at historic racing as an example.
Tell me what that is. I've heard that expression a few times now.
Well, it's a system where you take races that have ran in the past, you load them onto a software, and you can put them into a machine then, and you can go in and as a horse player and put your money in and decide that you're going to bet on a certain race, and they give you some data, as I understand it. Then you pick your horse, and the video screen runs the race, and figure out whether you win or not. It allows you to do more than just push a button as you would with a slot and see how it turns out. You actually decide on which horse you're going to bet on based on some preliminary and very sort of sketchy data, but it does give you something to base your decision on rather than just pushing the button. And it's worked well in some jurisdictions, and from our research it would probably generate maybe as much as $50 million, which could go to horse racing and help fill in what's needed to sustain the industry in the long run.
Okay, here's what I don't get. How is it kosher that you bet on a race that's already been run and therefore presumably somebody knows who's won it?
Because you don't know which race it is. You know some of the data on the trainers and the horses and all of that stuff, but you don't know enough to reveal the race. And there's 60,000 races in the system, and the only guy we know that could remember the outcome of 60,000 races is John Wilkinson. And he's promised not to bet on it, so we're in good shape.
So everything's okay.
Yeah.
All right, I understand that now. One of the things that you've suggested, you raised a lot of things there, Elmer, and I want to try to unpack some of that. One of the things you've suggested is, okay, this has to be right-sized. The number of races that the industry currently does is unsustainable. So you want to cut the races basically in half.
Well,
how would that work?
Well, it needs to reflect, what we've said is it needs to reflect consumer demand. So when we wrote our interim report, we said, okay, if you want the government, industry, if you want the government to be part of this, our advice to government is there's 4 preconditions that you'd have to agree to. One, you'd have to be transparent about the money, because there wasn't a lot of trend. You have to be accountable for the results. You have to have an industry that's focused on the consumer. So we're not having government money create demand. What is the demand? Like every other industry, if you want more sales, you create more demand by marketing and having a better experience for your customer and just being better in the marketplace. And then the fourth thing is, it's got to be a positive rate of return to the government. If you don't want to be accused of being subsidized, then you better make sure that what you're doing is generating more taxes to the public good than you're taking out.
Well, how do you generate more by having fewer races?
Well, what you do is you make sure that what's going in is not a bunch of people running around for money from the slot machines, right? Because the idea that if that money goes by way of purses to someone and says, well, I hired people and I bought things. Well, 13% or 8% of the provincial portion of the HST or 15% of income tax coming back to the government, that's 8 or 15% of the money. That's not the dollar going out, coming back, right? It has to be something that is fundamental and builds up an industry and generates a whole value chain. And you have to be within that. It can't just be created by government money coming in. It's got to be foundational, which is why we've said the government, if they're going to invest in the industry, should be investing at the track level, which is absolutely crucial to actually have races, versus at the purse level, which is just what people are running them for. And Steve, could you imagine going to people and saying, well, here's what we're going to do. We're going to take your tax money and we're going to have people, we're going to run horses around a track. Nobody actually bets on the race, but we're going to give those people who win tax money. So again, it doesn't pass the public policy test. Now, if you make an investment in the tracks and you say that investment in the tracks on an industry that's based on consumer demand generates a lot more taxes back to us than is going out.
Different story.
That's good public policy.
Okay, so cutting the number of races in half, I get, is one of the options. One of the other options you've talked about is changing the purses as well, the money that the winner gets. What do you want to do with that?
Well, you know, our model's based on this. We took 100% of the commission that's available from the pari-mutuel handles, so the amount of money that's actually net generated, and applied it to purses.
Pari-mutuel handles means?
It means the total amount bet. So there's a takeout from the total amount bet, and that takeout is the commission that's available. So post all of the takeouts, the horse players actually win now in that. So their winnings aside, this is the pool that's left. We took 100% of that and applied that to purses. And then we said, okay, what's the model that best distributes that purses amongst the horses that are and the races that people like to bet on? And that's how we designed our model, from 100% of what's available from commission. Now, that's going to require some public support to keep racetracks open and to do some of the other things that are involved in creating breeding activity in the province of Ontario that creates a lot of jobs. So that's what we're discussing right now, both the cost of keeping the racetracks up and running and how many racetracks that should be, and the cost of keeping an active and a vibrant and a robust breeding program in Ontario. All of those things help to contribute both to the rural fabric and the economic income in Ontario.
Okay, but Elmer, if you want to go from, let's say, 1,500 races a year to 800 races a year, which is, I think, what your recommendation is, roughly. I like football, okay? And if you took a CFL season of 18 games and you decided to make it 9 games, you got a very different season, you got a very different sport, you got a very different everything. Can you do that in horse racing and still have it be what it was?
Well, it's not going to be exactly what it was, and the analogy is not quite accurate, because most CFL games or NFL games, the stands are full. So the customers are coming to the game, and they're probably betting on those games on the side, but not in Canada. What was happening in the horse race industry, there were races being run in the 1,500, when you're talking 1,500, a lot of those races are being run with nobody watching in the stands. We know that there are tracks where as low as 5% of the purse came from the betting and the commission, or from the people who were in the stands.
And the rest came from? And
the rest came from the slots.
The slots.
So we know that there was a lot of races being run where there was no customer support. Now, and there was also no betting going on internationally, because we do have the ability to put our signal from Woodbine, for example, up, and international people in the United States and other countries bet on our races. But there were races being run that nobody was betting on. So if you take those races out of the system and try to concentrate on those races, horses, and level, where people are interested in betting, then you can sustain the industry through betting and through customer support.
If you do that, John Snobland, do you have enough of a critical mass of races to capture public attention?
Yeah, we think so. In fact, we're looking at taking the races out of the program that people really aren't paying much attention to now, and sticking with that critical mass that are interesting to both the horse player and to the public. This is not easy, though. We're asking a racehorse industry to do something most industries aren't able to do in the course of many years, and to do it in the course of a single season, really. And that's to get to half of the size, to reorient themselves so they're facing the customer, and to really do things differently so they can attract a new clientele, someone who's new and interested, younger people actually interested in the horse racing product. I think they can do that. I mean, we're pretty enthusiastic about the future of racing, but it's not a small task.
You will not be shocked to hear there has not been unanimity with regard to your report.
Come on.
I kid you not.
That's the third shocking thing I've heard today. There's betting on football. I got a note in my mailbox that said Steve Paikin is turning 20. I thought I've known the guy since he was 3, and now this.
When we were all in government, everybody was happy.
Everybody
And now they're not.
loved everything that you did. No, actually here, I want to read something from the Windsor Star, which says, here's a quote, it says, "It boggles my mind trying to figure out what they're," meaning you, "are trying to do with these recommendations." This is a quote from Ontario Harness Horse Association General Manager Brian Tropey. "It's like a kick in the gut," said Tropey, who raced at the now shuttered Windsor Raceway for 23 years. "People are struggling to find opportunities to race horses as it currently stands. This makes it even worse. Racetracks already have full fields. Reducing dates is a flawed argument." Okay, John Wilkinson, you say what to that?
Well, Brian is with his association and he's doing his job, and he is advocating for his members. The three of us were asked by the Minister of Agriculture to figure out what is good public policy. And because of our background of being in government, we have a kind of keen sense of what is good public policy overall, what's good for the province. And so it is, as John said, going to be very, very challenging. But what we're encouraged is the fact that there are people in the industry, some who I think were just in it for the money, who now have figured out the golden goose is not going to be around in Ontario anymore, and they'll go to some other jurisdiction because they just go to wherever there's the most money to be made. And then there's the people that we've met that we've actually been very inspired by. I mean, they really love horse racing, their industry, the horses, the friendships they've made. And we believe that if they're challenged with this big issue about how to reinvent their future, we can play a role in facilitating that. All we've done in our final report is recommend a model. So we haven't said, you know, we're the 3 smartest guys in the world, here's the way it's going to be. We've put out a model to challenge the industry to reinvent itself, to say that to the government and to the public, we are worthy of a public investment and we will be good stewards of the public money, and we will return a positive rate of return.
Okay, but even if that works according to Hoyle, this industry is still going to, and I think you've all three acknowledged this, it's still going to need a public subsidy. They're still going to need taxpayer money. How much?
Well, that's difficult.
Don't tell him.
Oh, sorry.
Give me a hint. It's not $345 million. And the government offered $50 million, and they said that's a joke. So somewhere in the middle is the right number.
We said that wasn't near enough.
Yeah.
Okay, and we went back and looked at what size of the industry. There has to be a critical mass. It's not a matter of running, for example, at Woodbine, you can't cut the number of thoroughbred races down to, say, 50 race dates per year, because nobody can make a living with a thoroughbred horse when you'd only have 50-day opportunities, because a horse only races maybe once every 2 weeks or whatever the schedule is, and you don't have an industry. So you need a critical mass. And so we, in our report, addressed that by sort of outlining how many thoroughbreds, how many or signature standard bred there should be. So there has to be a number of races. The amount of money that's required is you can't put a number on it. It depends on how the customer responds to the number of races that are out there. But there will need to be some money, either directly or indirectly, as we mentioned a minute ago, the historic racing idea, where there's some kind of lottery gaming product where the revenues is dedicated to horse racing, which is what happens in other jurisdictions. France, for example, in Sweden, they have lotteries that are dedicated just to horse racing. So there has to be something, other sorts of revenue, but the amount of it, it's more than 50 million. It's a lot less than 345.
But presumably, you guys, John Snoblin, have got to get this number right, or you could kill the goose that's laying the golden eggs. Is that possible?
Yeah, and you're in a government situation, and again, all of us have been there, where the government is faced with some tough economic decisions, and this is not an easy conversation. Any investment the government makes is tough at this time when you're looking at borrowed dollars. So we got to get as close to the edge of the cliff, if you will, in terms of downsizing the industry to a size that's sustainable and supportable, but without going over the cliff and having it collapse. And we've spent a lot of time on where is that point, and we're confident that our report is this side, the sustainable side of that cliff. But it's certainly there. When you collapse past a certain point, it just goes. And when it just goes, it's really hard to bring back.
Okay, here's the next question. Until a year ago, you were a member, obviously, of the Ontario government. You're the guy who brought in the HST, so controversial issues are not unknown to you. This is a government at the moment that is in the midst of a leadership contest. And as soon as that leadership contest is over, they are going to be seized with whether to bring the House back or whether to go right to an election, all of this kind of stuff. You guys need to get a decision out of this group in fairly short order, it seems to me. Are they capable of walking and chewing gum at the same time on this?
Well, Steve, one of the reasons, or one of the advantages of having 3 former cabinet ministers is we understand how the other side works from a mechanics point of view. And so we issued a final report. But what we did is we worked hard with government for this additional money to be allocated. And we did that before all of this other leadership stuff was going on. So we have the government, the bureaucracy, the people in the system understanding that a deal can be made with the industry to have it restructure, become sustainable, and go back to growing again, and having the economic drivers correct, not incorrect. And so we've been put in a position where we've been asked, the 3 of us, by the industry and the government, to stay involved to try to facilitate that agreement. And what I can tell you, people are negotiating right now to try to arrange that. And the government is negotiating in good faith. So it's not negotiating, we'll put it together, then we'll go ask them. We've already asked them. We've already outlined for them what we think is acceptable public policy and the amount of money required. And now we're busy seeing whether or not we can come to that agreement. We hope so, because it's a great industry and it's difficult what they're doing. So we've done that part of it.
I don't mean to be a killjoy here, but there's a lot of stuff going on right now, right? The capital P politics, minority parliament, leadership contest, election rumors. You really think you can get this on the radar screen?
We've kind of been sort of watching that. It's been interesting writing a report while things change as you write it. But again, I think it's that common experience of knowing how the decision-making process works, making sure everybody's fully apprised of what we're talking about and the magnitude of it. And I think we're in a good spot. I think the government is in good faith right now with the industry, and we're in a good spot. Now, there's a lot of I's to dot and T's to cross, and this is not done by any means, but it can be done.
Elmer, you wanted to say?
No, I just want to say the House doesn't have to be sitting. We're not even necessarily that the cabinet will have to, to look at this. They've already examined our report and accepted it and allotted some money for it. It's now a matter of the industry coming together and doing the right negotiations. We're optimistic. I think if you asked us 2 or 3 months ago, we might have been more pessimistic, but today we are optimistic. We had meetings yesterday with some tracks, and we had meeting with horse people. I think we have a reason to be optimistic that this can get wrapped up probably before there's a new premier in the province.
Okay. Let me take our remaining, whatever we've got here, 6-7 minutes, and not talk horse racing, but talk process, which is supposed to be a deathly dull thing to do on television, except that you 3 represent something quite different in terms of solving problems in this province right now. We have a former Liberal minister, a former Conservative minister, a former New Democrat minister. And the 3 of you have apparently sheathed your former partisan interests, come together and found this tripartite solution to a vexing problem. Is this a template for solving future problems that this province has? What do you think?
Yes.
This worked well?
It worked amazingly well. I think you have to have the right chemistry amongst the members, but cabinet ministers or former cabinet ministers have a way of viewing the world that you only achieve by actually doing that job, which is understanding the mechanics of politics, understanding the mechanics of public policy, understanding constituents. That's what you have to grapple with every day. So you have a kind of a world view, and it doesn't matter which government you work for. As we always say, we've all been in the same play, played the same role, right? And all ends the same way at the end of it. It's like Hamlet, right? Everybody's dead at the end. But if you talk to people, right? If you have played Hamlet, you meet another actor who's played Hamlet, even though you've never acted together, you have a common experience. And so what happens is there's a wealth of experience out there where people had a common experience. You can take down the temperature, which is what Minister McMeekin did by asking the three of us to do it, and understanding it was really a pernicious problem. This was not going to be easy, and get people really to focus on what is in the public good. And so I think it's a great template.
John Snoblin, what was it about the personalities of the three of you? Because I guess that's key. It's the right three. Never mind that it's three. It's the right three. What did you have going for you?
I think that first I didn't know Elmer or John before we started doing this, and so we basically met for the first, not really for the first time, but we got to know each other when we first put this together. And I don't think any of us had any idea how this would work. It's a great leap of faith by McMeekin. I mean, there's lots of risk in this. I would have liked to have been at the cabinet table and discussed that Snoblin guy.
You are not without your controversial past as well.
Yeah,
right?
indeed, and not without an opinion that's expressed fairly regularly. Yeah. So kudos to all those who took the risk. What worked with us, I think, is that we do have that common bond of experience. We understand what loyalty is inside of a government, how valuable that is. I think that's something that we all place a high priority on, and we come from different sectors too. I mean, we not only worked in different governments, but we worked in different economic times. So we have that experience. John obviously has a lot of the economic background. Elmer has certainly a strong sense of what's going on in rural Ontario, having worked in OMAFRA for 5 years and been a highly regarded minister during his day. And I bring the coffee. So, I think there was a mix that way.
You know the industry.
And coffee. I can bring
coffee. Coffee, okay. How about from your point of view? Because New Democrats and Conservatives certainly see the world differently. Liberals can kind of tack either way as time requires. How did you find common cause with these guys?
There's something about it that neither of the Johns mentioned, and that is that I think all three of us believe that politics is when elections are on, or when leadership contests are on. And John Snoblin and I had a long conversation in a drive back from Sudbury when our flight didn't come by to pick us up, and we talked about politics almost the whole trip. And John and I both believe that politics is very passionate to us, but when the election's over, there's jobs to be done, and politicians work together. And that kind of was the way it used to be in politics in this country. I'm not sure it's the same today as it was a few years ago. So I think when the three of us sat down, politics didn't come into this. We're politicians, we're passionate about what we do, but we were able to put that aside and look at what the problem was, what the task we were given. So we focused on that and got along well. I mean, we do bring different perspectives, yes, but we agree more than we ever disagree on most things.
Just on the issue of whether this is a template, now having covered all of you and seen all of you work at Queen's Park, you are three of the least stupidly partisan people that I know who have done this kind of thing, right? There are people who do this, who do what you do and are blindly, obscenely, and the public hates that kind of partisanship. Since you've demonstrated that you can actually solve problems by getting some of that out of politics, is it a pipe dream to assume that you could take this template, transport it to Queen's Park, and actually do business that way today?
Well, you look at the question of the minority government. The one that we have right now, I think everyone's agreed it's dysfunctional. Right? I think the Premier said, I'm pro-gun the House because it's dysfunctional, right? So, and I don't think anybody said, oh no, it's functional. So this dysfunction, I think what we've done is in stark contrast to that. It does show that if people can focus on the public good, right? Not what's in the interest of the government, what's in the interest of the industry, what's in the interest of the public. If you can get people to focus on that, which is what all the great debates in the legislature and Parliament are all about, what's in the public interest. If you get people to focus on that, it's amazing how you can take something that most people thought a couple of months ago, Steve, could not be fixed, and get reasonable people around the table, make them feel comfortable. And people were very, very good with us. We asked them to speak to us in confidence. We said, tell us what you really think. but don't blog about it, don't tweet about it, don't do press release, and we won't do that to you either, right? We just want to hear. We want to get, and we said the same thing to the government. People were very, very forthcoming. And I think that we kind of had a unique ability to get people to relax, because there's a lot of emotions in this file, and get people to tell us what the problem was, and then try to figure out a way to solve it.
John Snoblin, could this work down there at the Pink Palace?
It's hard. I think you'd like to see more of cooperation between political parties and ideologies, because frankly, when we're facing really hard problems, it all comes down to what makes the province better. The challenge, though, is in the legislature, and I think everyone would agree it's not designed to have that kind of come together. Those moments. There's not a lot of marshmallows being roasted on the third floor.
Reputations.
And the daily contest in the legislature, one-upmanship, the daily news clips, it's a very intense and shortly focused kind of activity for the most part. It's a lot easier when you take it out of the Legislative Assembly and say, here's a problem, see if you can disconnect, rewire this, have a look at this problem, do a deep dive. First, we had the time to do that. And ministers have got hundreds, if not thousands of files. And so we had a chance to deep dive on one file and a chance to do it outside of the acrimony that's just common in the legislature.
Well,
I think there was the charge to us was to look for a solution. And here's 50 million. It wasn't predisposed of what the solution was going to be. I mean, there are lots of groups out there trying to solve problems, and they know what the solution is before they're given the charge. I mean, I shouldn't be that callous, but I mean, sometimes people are out there trying to solve problems, and politically, the solution's over here. They're just supposed to get to it. We didn't get a solution given to us behind or in a brown envelope or anything like that.
You had to find it.
We had a full charge of here's 50 million. Go and look for a solution. So it wasn't given to us ahead of time. We're very often consultants know what they're supposed to come back to the government. We didn't know what we were supposed to come back with. They thought we were going to come back with a solution costing 50 million. The industry kind of rallied around the panel back in those days because we said that's not enough. So we demonstrated to the horsemen and the tracks that we were independently minded, willing to listen to everybody, and told the government 50 million is not enough. That set the stage for us to be able to do the rest of our report and put something together that we think is a sustainable industry.
And that's because of Ted.
And that was Ted. That
We
was
all
the
got
minister.
onto this because we all know the minister, and he didn't say, I want to hire you guys to punt this file. I want to hire you guys to fix this file. And you tell me, write me a report and tell me the truth, whether I or my colleagues are going to like it or not. Just tell us.
He may not be the minister in 2 months.
But he's the minister today, and he's done a remarkable job at doing something very, very innovative. As we know, you watch Yes Minister, right? They say, oh, that's very brave. What Ted did was very brave. And so we felt an obligation as former cabinet ministers, knowing how much he had stuck his neck out, that we didn't want to let him down, because the industry should be very proud, and his government colleagues, that he was willing to look at a different way to solve a difficult problem.
Yeah, he should be very proud.
And I want to thank the three of you for coming in today and sharing your views with us on this. Elmer Buchanan, the former NDP cabinet minister; John Snoblin, the former Progressive Conservative cabinet minister; John Wilkinson, the former Liberal cabinet minister. Thanks, gents.
Thank you.
Thanks.
Support Ontario's public television. Donate at tvo.org.